Go back to Romans chapter 2. I said earlier that one of the greatest crimes we can commit against God is to publicly assault his character, and that's done in two different ways. It can be done through our actions, as we just read, by showing partiality and claiming to be a Christian. We are, in fact, placing our actions on Christ. We are condemning Christ, really, by showing that, well, if we are the standard, if we are Christians, if we are, in fact, acting and living as Christ commanded us, and we act that way, then people are going to look at us and say, okay, well, that's the way God is. That's the way Christ is. So by our actions, we can condemn God's character. But the second thing is we can do it by our teaching and by our theology. And this is where the Apostle Paul really defends God's character and God's nature against many of the charges against him of being an unjust judge. Calvinism is a doctrine that I want to talk to you a little bit about because we mentioned it last Sunday, and some of you are familiar with it and some of you are not. Some of you are just vaguely familiar with it. But Calvinism is a doctrine that is very common amongst Protestant Christianity. And I believe it is a evil and wicked doctrine. I'm going to be very blunt about it. All right? I believe it's an evil and wicked doctrine, and I believe that because it assaults God's character. It portrays God in a way that is absolutely contrary to what he has said about himself and about his character in the past. Calvinism makes God out to be irrational and arbitrary in his judging. The Bible says that God is not willing that any should perish. That tells us what God's nature is like. He is a loving and gracious God. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believed in him would not perish. Isn't that right? Does God love everyone? Yes. Does God want everyone to be saved? The Bible says that at least 3 times in the New Testament. Then why doesn't he do it if he has the power to do so? And if he is in fact electing a certain group to be saved and not electing another group, why is he doing that? He's being arbitrary. He's being an unjust judge. Calvinism makes God out to be a bit of a monster because he created, according to Calvinists, he created the bulk of humanity to suffer in eternal torment with no opportunity to be saved. Calvinism makes God out to be an egomaniac because he created these things and he's doing these things for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to display his glory. But that's not why God is doing all these things. Now, God does get glory, and he ought to get glory because he's the only one that really should be worshipped, and the only one who is worthy to be worshipped. But he's not doing it to be worshipped. When God commands us to worship him and him alone, he's doing it for our good, not for his glory, for his good. Calvinism makes God out to be a liar. I'll give you an example of this. Look at Revelation chapter 22, verse 1. You know this is talking about the New Jerusalem. He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and the Lamb. In the middle of its street and on either side of the river was a tree of life which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. There shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it. His servants shall serve him, etc. Go down to verse 17. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. And let him who hears say, come. And let him who thirsts come. He just got done talking about this river of living water that's going to be flowing from God's throne in the New Jerusalem. He's telling people, come. And let him who thirsts come. Whoever desires, let him take of the water of life freely. So what is God doing? God is giving a blanket offer of salvation to everyone who will simply come. But what does Calvinists say? God has provided the way for only a small group to come, and he has barred the way to life to the rest of mankind. That's essentially what they say. So what does that mean then when we see offers like this that God makes to people generally. When he says, come, anyone who is willing may come. And he can drink of the water of life freely. It's free. What is God? If Calvinism is true, what is God doing here? He's giving an insincere offer, isn't he? Isn't that an insincere offer? If it is not really available to all, then why is God telling everyone that they can come? It's insincere. We have the same thing in Genesis when God is speaking to Cain. You remember when Cain and Abel brought their offerings to God, and Cain, he gets all mad because God didn't accept his offering. You know what God said to Cain after that? He said, look, Cain, yes, you will also be approved. Right. But if not, sin lies at the door. He's telling Cain, look, you've got a choice. You can make a choice and you can be approved. Cain, if you'll simply change your attitude. Was Cain among the elect? Not likely. He went out after that and murdered his brother, and then God put a curse on him, right? Did God offer salvation to Cain? Yeah, he did. Well, if Cain's not one of the elect, if Cain could not be saved, which is what Calvinism will tell you, then God was insincere in his offer to Cain, and God was essentially mocking Cain. Is that the kind of God that ought to be worshipped and served? A God who plays the bait and switch game on somebody. You know what Calvinism is essentially? Is it feigns humility for man and exalting God's sovereignty, supposedly, at the expense of his holiness, at the expense of his character. They claim to be exalting God and bringing man down on his part because man cannot have any part in his own salvation. Right? So man is dust and dirt and worse than pond scum. And God is so great that he controls everything. Ultimately, Calvinism teaches that everything is done at God's direction and at God's command. And if you press that to its logical conclusion, it means that Satan himself is acting according to God's command. And if Satan is acting according to God's command, then who is ultimately responsible for all the wickedness and evil in the world? God. God's not a holy God. Not only that, we talked about being an unjust judge, but if God created man in this awful state so that he can't even exercise his will to choose what is good, then why is God holding him accountable? Why is he torturing him in hell forever and ever, when in fact he only did what he could do? He had no other options. Ultimately, that's what Calvinism teaches. Is that, they say that God is displaying his justice when he does that, but that's not justice. We only punish people when they make the wrong choices. Isn't that right? When they have the opportunity to do good, but they refuse to do good, that's when they deserve to be punished because of their choices.